Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the webinar, Got LID, a municipal self-assessment tool for Rhode Island communities, brought to you by the SNEP Network. The Southeast New England Network is a training technical assistance network comprised of 14 entities with expertise in stormwater and watershed management. The network came together in October of 2019 with the support of a cooperative agreement with EPA Region 1. The vision of the network is to build a resilient ecosystems and connect communities through action, collaboration, and innovation. Our mission is to empower communities to achieve healthy watersheds, sustainable financing, and long-term climate resilience through stormwater and ecological restoration projects. We are here to serve municipalities, tribes, and organizations within the SNEP region of Rhode Island and Southeast Massachusetts. For more information, please visit our website, snepnetwork.org, and connect with us if you would like assistance. Before we get into the presentation, I would like to draw your attention to the GoToWebinar questions dialog box. Please type in your questions at any time during the webinar. My colleague Tess will be monitoring the questions. Now I'd like to introduce Lisa Philo, who is a communication specialist with the University of Rhode Island NEMO program. NEMO stands for Non-Point Education for Municipal Officials. Now I'll hand it over to Lisa to get us started.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Leah, to the SNEP Network. I wanted to welcome everybody this afternoon and mention that hopefully most of you, as you were waiting for the webinar to begin, saw that there were a lot of images from windows around the world on display on your screen. And I wanted to take just a moment to ask you about the view from your window right now. So go ahead and have a look, take a stretch before we all settle in for the next hour. And what's special about that view to you, if you just give that a second's thought? Those images that were in the slideshow were taken from a public Facebook group called A View from My Window. And I didn't cherry pick them. I just selected the first 80 or so that were there, because the thing that stood out to me the most when I was looking at that site was that almost everyone there focused on some aspect of nature or something about their urban area that made it enjoyable. So from the cottage garden in the UK to the courtyard in India to that amazing water view in Sydney, Australia. And what's all that got to do with why we're here today? Well, first of all, we felt like we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the strange circumstances in which we're all gathering. And secondly, for us at least, it seems for many others out there also, this quarantine period has shown us just how much we truly appreciate our natural spaces and the aspects of our communities that make them livable, those parks and pedestrian zones and street trees. And interestingly enough, low impact development often can accentuate and enhance those aspects of our communities without it even being the intended purpose. So as we get ready to delve into that, let me introduce Jenny Paquette, as Senior Environmental Planner at Rhode Island's DEM. And she is here today to talk to you about why there is a need for this low impact development municipal self-assessment. And after that, Lorraine Joubert, Director of Rhode Island NEMO, and I will share an overview of the self-assessment and resources that can help you not only complete it, but also use it to continue to make your municipality a greener, more livable, more attractive community, no matter what window you're looking out from. I'll turn it over to you, Jenny.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, thanks for that lovely grounding. People have taken a lot of nice pictures. I'm going to start with some context for why we developed the self-assessment and do sort of a refresher on what LID is and why it's so important. Well, stormwater runoff is a problem in Rhode Island, and it's a problem for three reasons. And this is due to land use and development, which causes these changes. Runoff from development is polluted with whatever's on the ground that it picks up. The most prevalent water pollution problems in Rhode Island are excess nutrients and pathogens like bacteria, and also sediment. The other thing is that there's too much of it. So more runoff is being sent downstream where it causes flooding and erosion problems. So now you're talking property damage, habitat damage. And if more runoff is being sent away, that means it's not being conserved as a resource closer to where it fell. So there's less water that's locally available, less water that would have been replenishing your groundwater, less water going to your trees, wildlife, providing base flow and streams. So those are ecological impacts that also affect things like fire risk, your drinking water supplies. And one of the resources we have, the Gathering Your Team PowerPoint, does a great job of explaining this. So I'm not going to go into detail here, but if you want to get your green algae fix, there's a nice picture of that in there. But you can see that this is cumulative. Every development adds up in contributing to these problems. And water is a valuable resource, and we should be treating that way. So what can we do? Well, we should require that stormwater be properly managed in order to stop these problems from continuing, and to be more responsible stewards of the way we develop land. And LID addresses all three of these problems on a site basis as development occurs, also with redevelopment projects, and it does so more effectively than structural controls alone. So this is why LID is important and why you want to make it a real part of your stormwater program. But what is low impact development? You can find a good definition in the state stormwater manual. I'm not going to read it, but basically it's a comprehensive approach to managing stormwater as a resource. And it puts to good use the role of plants and soils in the hydrologic cycle. LID puts an emphasis on preventing impacts and maintaining hydrology as much as possible using non-structural techniques before mitigating impacts. And when I say as much as possible, every situation is different. Clearly, urban areas are going to have a harder time of avoiding impacts, but there's still plenty that an urban community can do. So the self-assessment is meant for use by urban, suburban, and rural municipalities. With LID, water is not a waste product to push downstream as a problem to someone else, because really we're all paying for it. It's expensive to restore water quality. It's expensive to restore damage from flooding. It affects our quality of life to have degraded resources or flooding problems. And LID is an effective way and a less expensive way of managing stormwater impacts. There are three goals or three parts to the design process to LID, and these are in order. You'll see the self-assessment groups the strategies by these goals and functions. LID choices are development planning techniques that avoid impacts to natural hydrology, avoid impacts to water resources in infiltration areas, then techniques that reduce impacts, so methods that minimize hard surfaces, minimize land disturbance, and techniques that minimize the need for fertilizer. And lastly, things to manage impacts, so structures to infiltrate or treat runoff as close to the source as possible, and also practices to keep the site clean. And I just want to make a distinction here of LID versus green infrastructure, because sometimes these terms are used interchangeably, but they're not exactly the same thing. LID site planning and design techniques, which is what we're focusing on, are things that avoid impacts and reduce impacts, and in some cases undo impacts to the hydrology. So doing this causes less runoff and less pollution to begin with. And there's a suite of options that do these that are basically governed by your municipality's regulations. So check out the self-assessment. Here are some examples. The bottom picture there with the tree has a lot of LID stuff going on. The top image showing the two different kinds of slopes. On the left, that's what's typically required in a lot of subdivision regulations, a 3-to-1 slope. On the right is a LID alternative, disturbing less land, preserving more trees, as long as they stabilize the slope. There are also non-structural BMPs that manage stormwater runoff, and those are things like disconnecting flow. And those are also in the self-assessment, so definitely check it out. And here I just want to contrast these LID site planning and design techniques with green stormwater infrastructure. And green infrastructure in general can include stuff like your open space network, but here I'm talking specifically about those structural BMPs that are used to manage what's left over. So again, taking advantage of plants and or soils to manage the excess runoff. These are generally engineered control structures. They can be designed landscapes. They're the types of things that have the design and performance criteria that contained in the state's stormwater rules. And here are some examples. The image on the right here is of a green roof. And this is the distinction I want to make clear. The structural stuff that the state looks at versus the non-structural stuff that DEM does not have control over. There's sort of this misconception that because LID is required by the state stormwater rules that DEM does LID, but this is not really the case. DEM does not do LID site planning and design. Municipalities have to do that. DEM only reviews the engineered stuff. And the focus of the self-assessment tool is on the non-structural techniques that your local regulations can control. And also to help make sure you don't inadvertently prohibit these types of structural techniques if they can be used in your type of community. So for example, grass swales, that's not really realistic in an urban environment, but there's no reason they can't be used in a more rural setting. But if your regulations specify catch basins and pipes, then that makes it a lot harder to do. I'm going to get back to LID because it's good for more than just stormwater. The great thing is it has all these other co-benefits too. Using LID reduces future municipal service costs. Think snow plowing, road maintenance, and also future costs for TMDL compliance. These are avoided costs. And for those of you that are dealing with TMDLs, you know what I'm talking about. It can be pretty expensive. Using LID reduces development costs, and that's a benefit for the developer. Using less pavement, there's a cost savings. Then you only need smaller BMPs. They also tend to be more attractive developments. So that helps them easier, they're easier to sell, and you should be able to gain community support for them a little easier. LID also helps prevent flooding, and that's regardless of climate change, but also for climate change resiliency. Using LID techniques counteracts heat island effect, builds resiliency to drought, and resiliency to increased flooding that we can expect from climate change. And here I just want to point out that stormwater is a problem regardless of climate change. But climate change makes these problems worse, making LID strategies all the more important. LID techniques reduce high urban temperatures that help save on cooling costs. And LID helps achieve other community goals such as traffic calming. Clearly, any goals pertaining to water quality, which may be in your comprehensive plan, but also goals for habitat protection, any goals you may have to be a greener or more sustainable community. And this is all good stuff. So if I haven't convinced you already of the benefits of LID, we believe LID is a really important part of the solution to maintain and improve water quality in Rhode Island and for helping on those other issues I talked about. But also, there's a regulatory background to this. In 2007, the state legislature passed the Cleaner Bay Act, which is Rhode Island General Laws 4561.2. And some of you may know Rhode Island General Laws 45 is cities and towns. This law requires non-structural, low-impact design practices and techniques for the state stormwater rules. And in the state stormwater rules, standard 1 that the applicants need to meet is the use of LID site planning and design strategies to the maximum extent practicable, which is a total mouthful. Okay, so why did we develop the municipal self-assessment? I've already made this point, but again, LID site planning and design techniques are matters that are strictly municipal jurisdiction. It's zoning dimensions that end up governing how much pavement's created. It's those subdivision regulations that have to do with street design, site disturbance, landscaping requirements, stuff like that. And the self-assessment walks you through all of this. Anyway, those types of things are not contained in the state stormwater rules. If your regulations specify a 30-foot wide street in a low density neighborhood, DEM can't do anything about it. And this is really the dilemma. Also, by the time DEM receives an application for a state permit, which is an engineered plan, it is way too late in the game to be having a discussion about site layout, road widths, and other things which are under municipal purview. So we are really encouraging you to take advantage of the authority you have to make a difference on this. On top of that, we think the stormwater permit applications we receive could be doing much better when it comes to LID. And this is a major factor that prompted us to do this. We're trying to raise the bar for the benefit of everyone, but we can't do that without you. Another thing is that the RIPTE's MS4 general permit, many of the municipalities are under this, but this permit supports the use and incorporation of lid non-structural techniques in the local regulations. So MS4s are supposed to demonstrate how their local stormwater program is consistent with the state stormwater rules and how the program will be specifically tailored for the local community. And remember, standard 1 in the state rules is lid site planning and design strategies to the maximum extent practicable. So we want municipalities to consider and ask themselves, how have you tailored lid to the maximum extent practicable for your community? And that is not as easy as it sounds. You can't just make a rule that says lid is required, because these are specific things that are peppered throughout your local regulations, and they may or may not be very lid conducive. And we want to help. So those are the reasons why we developed the self-assessment. The self-assessment is a tool for you to go through this process of defining exactly what lid means in your community. It helps you see what you already have that is lid conducive, stuff you may not have known was actually lid, and then also to see what other types of things are lid that are out there in the realm of possibilities of lid. And then we provide you with best practices so that you can see how you compare to lid benchmarks. And this is to help you figure out whether there's some wiggle room for improvement when it comes to lid in your regulations. Also, we're seriously considering this in the next MS4 general permit. It's actually a goal of our non-point source pollution program to do that. But really, municipalities should be doing lid as much as possible because it's the right thing to do. And we developed these resources to help you implement lid and also to gain support for lid in your community. And Lisa and Lorraine are going to talk about those resources and also the help that's available right now. So I'm going to turn the discussion over to them, but when you complete the assessments, you can send them to me. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you find out and seeing progress on this. You can also submit them with your annual MS4 reports. For those of you that have filled it out, you can see that we've already started integrating this on the reports. But that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, for that great background to the importance of lid and state versus local roles. I'm sure that everyone is eager to dive into the self-assessment and exactly what it looks like. And I just have a couple of things to say about how to go about completing it before Lorraine takes over and shows you the details. So one of the most important things to remember about this self-assessment tool is that it's intended to be a group project. And you're especially going to want to remember that when you see the 66 questions, because we know right off the bat it's going to feel a little bit daunting. Your municipality's planner is likely going to take the lead, but they are going to need significant input from staff in other departments, such as the DPW, engineering, building, the planning board. And not just to split the work. It's not just a workload question. It's really a matter of the process and the fact that involving multiple people in the assessment is going to enhance the opportunity for your municipality to truly consider new planning and design techniques that are going to work best for your community to promote low impact development. So how does the process work? I'm having a little bit of a screen freeze. Bear with me for just a minute. Let's see. Maybe we can get to the next screen. There we go. Okay. I think we're there. Let's see.
You are all set to go, Lisa.
Yeah, it's not forwarding for some reason. Are you seeing the LID self-assessment? Where do we begin?
Yes.
There we go. Excellent. Okay. Books. Thank you, everybody, for bearing with me. We're going to get better at these webinars the longer quarantine lasts. So the self-assessment has several detailed pages before the questions, and they really do give a thorough overview of how to complete it. So this is just a quick version, but it goes something like this. The first step is to identify all the development rules in your community. And there are 2 tables that have been created in the self-assessment PDF that are tables that you can fill in, places to look for these development rules and to guide you. And they include zoning, land development, subdivision regulations, etc. And in addition to that being in the self-assessment, Ginny created a fantastic cheat sheet that we're going to talk about just a little bit later in the presentation to help with that step as well. Some fantastic guidance for you to find all of these rules. The second step is to identify the local authorities who administer the rules. And there's a table in the assessment that's designed to help with that step. The next step is working through the assessment with your team. Again, there are detailed instructions, and Lorraine is going to take you through that in just a minute. What does it look like going through the questions? And the next step is sharing those results. This is where the action really happens. This is where the progress happens towards getting better LID. You want to set a schedule and a list of priorities and start to work on those views from our windows that we all want. And finally, you'll be submitting the completed assessment to the DEM with your annual MS4 report. And it doesn't really end there, because the true work is working on those ordinance updates and changes. So enough about all the background. Let's dive into the actual self-assessment itself and take a test drive. I know it feels right now like we have no idea what's going on, but you will. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lorraine.
Thank you, Lisa. That was a great intro to the process. I'm going to just have PowerPoints for 2 slides. And I'm waiting for that to, there we go. So this is the cover of the document. And I'm going to briefly review the table of contents. Lisa and Jenny covered the introduction and the instructions. The heart of the assessment, though, is the municipal self-assessment, aka the checklist that we call it. And this is the heart of the assessment with its 66 questions. It's organized by the 3 main goals: avoid, reduce, manage impacts, and also by the 10 minimum measures that correspond to the DEM stormwater rules. So by this organization, it allows you to directly evaluate how well you're complying with DEM minimum standards. And then lastly, the 4th major item is the primer on lid design techniques and principles. And that's a series of 28 fact sheets with more descriptive information about the questions that you'll be reviewing. So now I'm going to switch over to the PDF. Let me see if I can get out of here and minimize that. Bring up the PDF. Okay. I'm going to start with question 20 on page 7, which is under the objective to minimize impervious surfaces. I'm beginning here because this section has the most multi-part questions and the ones that require you to dig into your ordinances and sometimes report numeric standards. This is actually the longest section of the assessment. So question 20 asks, have you adopted maximum lot impervious cover limits in addition to maximum lot building coverage? So the choices are yes or no. And with these round radio buttons, you can only have one option. So I put yes. And then the action is whether you want to leave this as is, leave the existing ordinances and regulations the same, or consider revising them. And assuming we can do better, I'm going to check to be revised. Then these various ordinance types should be intuitive. Basically, standalone ordinance is one, ZO zoning, LDSR, land development subdivision regulations, soil erosion sediment control, a standalone stormwater ordinance, or any other type of requirement such as standard operating procedures. And you can explain what that is in the little text box provided there. And so you can see with the check boxes, you can check all of them, as many as you want. I have to apologize for the small size of the boxes, but that's the best we could do. Section name and number for each of the items that you identify is important so that we can look up exactly what it is and maybe provide examples to share with all the communities. That would be very helpful, I think. And then you have a longer notes box, which can be for anything that doesn't fit above, or you can put your comments about what's been working, what hasn't, what do the comp plan goals say, and what you might consider changing. So these notes and the actions on leaving as is or to be revised, those are the items that you want to share with other staff and boards to reach a conclusion on your next steps, your short list of changes to make. So let's just look at one more question on the next page. Let's see. Hey, question 22. This one is one of the more complex ones. Is the stated goal of your roadway standards to minimize impervious surfaces to the extent possible? So the options are yes or no. The actions are the same. But in this case, parts A and B are asking you about the minimum pavement width allowed for streets in low density developments or in higher density developments. And so you would have to actually look up the minimum pavement width and report it within this text box and below as well. Now you'll see that each of them have an example of 18 to 20 feet for the low density roads and 20 to 24 feet for the higher density. So those are benchmarks, the LID benchmarks that Jenny talked about that provide guidance on typical standards of what you should be striving for. So if yours are greater than the benchmarks, it would be useful to put in the notes why you need to change or why you feel you need to leave it as is, just for the benefit of your boards and also for DEM reviewers. And finally, the notes is really the most important thing to be sharing with the board members and staff. Okay, so this is basically the description of the questions. They're fairly intuitive, so we think that just with a few examples, you should be fine with all the others. The only thing I'd like to address now is the topics. You'll note that there is an open book symbol with topic Q next to question 22B. If I click onto that, it brings me to the primer page for that topic. So for street width, it describes urban road street widths, has illustrations or photos of more rural roads, and then it has references for much more information. This is typical of one of the topic pages. I'll just cover a few others. Permeable pavements gives a quick photographs of various types and references to fact sheets with much more information on each type. Maximum lot pervious cover, where we started, lists several municipalities, urban and rural, that have adopted maximum lot impervious cover limits with illustrations, good and bad, of too much pavement and a lot with very tight limits of disturbance. So with that, I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint and let's see, current slide. what happens if you have so many priorities that you have such a long laundry list that it blocks the view of where you want to go? You can't see your way around the long list. Well, we've selected just arbitrarily 6 different practices that we feel are some of the most effective in reducing impervious cover for you to consider as definite priorities. The first 2, which are based on the goal to avoid impacts, is to use compact growth boundaries paired with protection of open space and wetland buffers. And this can be conservation development, or it could be tight village and urban growth boundaries surrounded by low density development. It also means limiting disturbance around construction areas and buildings to protect wetlands and buffers, hydric soils, avoid slopes, and protect infiltration areas, which could be any naturally vegetated area or forest or sandy permeable area, as well as stormwater BMPs and OWTS leach fields. In terms of reducing impacts, certainly reducing road widths and parking areas is key, primarily because statistics show that up to 60% of the impervious cover in a watershed or town is due generally to road widths and parking. Also, to reduce impervious cover, adopt those maximum impervious cover limits. And finally, to manage impacts, require LID for all projects and enforce those limitations to the extent possible. And finally, design for ease of maintenance based on available staff and equipment. And the Providence Stormwater Innovation Center is doing a lot of very, very practical on-the-ground research on maintenance of these LID and GI BMPs. And they have frequent workshops, so we suggest you take advantage of their resources. So I'm going to turn this over back to Lisa now for the resources available to help you go through this process.
Great, thank you, Lorraine, for that. I know that the self-assessment might feel a little bit daunting at first, but I think your overview gets everybody on the right track, Lorraine. And I'm going to speak in just a moment about some of the personal help that we can offer. But let's start with hopefully a little chuckle. We will not just tell you to Google it. So we do have a few things that we can offer. Hopefully we'll get my presentation going. Let's see, there we go. Okay, so what do we have? We've got some basics. We've got fact sheets, quite a few. We've got an overview of LID. It's a really nicely designed 4-page fact sheet. Perhaps less important for those of you who are planners, but it might be useful in the sharing process, sharing with other departments who are less familiar with LID, definitely sharing with boards and councils. We also have a very detailed fact sheet about the low impact development municipal self-assessment that provides sort of a recap of what you're hearing today in this webinar. In addition to those fact sheets, there are a few others on our website, which I will share with you in a minute. We have PowerPoint presentations. Hopefully you do not feel poisoned after seeing them. We tried to keep them interesting. The PowerPoint presentations are meant to help you get your team pulled together. 1 part inspiration and 2 parts the process that I spoke about at it being a group project and kind of how to sit down with your team. Another PowerPoint presentation is for actually showcasing the results to boards and councils once you're done and you have goals. So those would be, again, maybe 2 parts inspiration and 1 part, here's how we want to move forward. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that we have a cheat sheet that Jenny Paquette very kindly took it upon herself to create. and it is meant to help you in the process of completing the self-assessment. It guides you to the most common sources of all those rules and ordinances that you're asked to think about in the self-assessment questions. And I think it'll be a huge asset as you complete those questions. Finally, we also have a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of experience with this topic. So yes, we've got fact sheets and cheat sheets and PowerPoints, but we also have ourselves. Lorraine, as the director of Rhode Island NEMO, has a wealth of experience, and Jenny is partnering with us with DEM, and we are willing to meet with your staff, with your boards, to help you work through the assessment. We have funding for the next 2 years to help municipalities complete this really important inventory of what's working and what could be better. You might know that the SNEP network just had a call for participants. That particular call finished on April 15th, but if you missed it, Lorraine and I are still here and available to help facilitate the process of completing the assessment and making the ordinance changes, because as we've emphasized earlier, it's really after the assessment that the good work begins. And again, we can help you with that part of the process as well. You are welcome to seek assistance from the SNEP network on technical issues. And as I said, we have funding for the next 2 years. So it is a limited time offer, but there's plenty of opportunity to help you with this process. Where can you find all of these resources? The Rhode Island NEMO website, which is there on your screen, has a page where the municipal self-assessment itself, that interactive PDF, is linked. The fact sheets are linked. The PowerPoints are linked, as well as a few other links to external documents and websites that might be of use to you. And there are also SNEP network resources that we think you would find useful. There is an upcoming webinar on June 3rd being offered with Mass Audubon, who also has their own bylaw review tool. So you could check out this website, and their work definitely complements the work that you're hearing about here today. So finally, I want to conclude and bring it full circle and just ask you to think about, what is the view from your window? What's the view that you want to have from your window, from all the windows in your communities? How can LID be incorporated into your communities for the benefit of all? And I would be remiss if I did not mention that the self-assessment was created with funding from the Rhode Island Department of Transportation, with support from the Department of Environmental Management, when we had a long-term project called the Rhode Island Stormwater Solutions Project. And URI outreach to municipalities is now being assisted with the SNEP network. And Rhode Island NEMO is also funded by the Rhode Island Department of Health. If you have any other questions after the webinar is over, and I know we have plenty of time for questions for Jenny and Lorraine now, but after that, please always feel free to get in touch with all of us with any additional questions that you might have. So with that, Tess, I think I can turn it over to you to help facilitate the question and answer period.
Great. Thank you so much for this wonderful information. I wanted to start off just by letting everyone listening know that if you do want to revisit this presentation at all, or if you'd like to listen back on the recording, we're going to be making this available on our website, snepnetwork.org, and it'll be posted within the next 48 hours. You can find it under past webinar events. So first, we do have questions coming in. If you haven't submitted a question yet and you'd like to, just go to the question dialog box and type it in at any time, and we will keep monitoring them. If we don't get to all of them today, that's okay. I will send these along to Jenny, Lorraine, and Lisa, and they can get back to you offline. So the first question, I think let's start with Lorraine, and then Lisa and Jenny, you guys can chime in. So the first question is, does the checklist promote coordination of transit policies along with recommendations for site requirements? For example, reducing parking would be more likely to be implemented if people didn't have to use cars to get around. So Lorraine, what do you think?
Well, certainly allowing for different parking requirements, near transit stations and that type of thing, providing credits if there's mass transit. So I think there's a lot of flexibility, but we don't go into that level of detail. If you can justify that some of your requirements for transit or anything other than individual cars can minimize parking, then I think that you can make that case probably effectively. So it's pretty open on that topic.
Jenny, did you have anything to add?
Just to say, yeah, we do address that. That is one of the questions. Parking garages are mentioned in there. Urban areas are more compact and they're a more efficient use of space to begin with. But there are provisions also for off-site parking and all shared parking for mixed-use developments.
Right.
And then if there's transit, reduced parking requirements. In urban areas, I think, are getting away from minimum parking at all. With the advent of the autonomous vehicle, changes in technology are making that easier and easier to do. So there should be public support to integrate that in your zoning ordinance.
Great. Okay, moving along. The next question. Oh, sorry, Lisa, did you have something to add too? No? Okay.
No, I didn't. No.
Great. So the next question, maybe we start with you, Jenny. Is there a deadline to submit the self-assessment? And if so, what is it?
There is no deadline. It's not currently a requirement, but it is a goal to have it required in the next MS4 general permit. I don't have a timeline on that. So, but in the meantime, the funding support is available now for you guys to get that done. So take advantage of the help that we're providing, that Lisa and Lorraine have through the SNEP program. It is a limited time thing. So there's no deadline, but yeah, you could be working on it if you want to take advantage of those resources.
Great. Did you have anything to add, Lorraine or Lisa?
Well, the only thing about there is no hard deadline, but it is a question in the annual report on how you're implementing LID. So unless you have other actions that are being taken to implement LID, beginning this process and submitting the assessment either partially completed or fully completed with the annual report would make a lot of sense and demonstrate compliance with the MS4 requirements.
All right, great. The next question, let's start, maybe Jenny, you can answer first. You said that this was cumulative and that every development contributes. Is there any particular reason why you can't or don't review all the projects?
Yeah, DEM only reviews projects that are greater than one acre, and that's with some exceptions, but it is a cumulative problem. Every project does have an impact. But that's why we have a question on the self-assessment to see if your municipality reviews projects either for soil erosion, sediment control, or for stormwater requirements that are smaller than 1 acre. So that's a question on there that municipalities can take and take charge of for themselves.
Anything else to add, Lisa or Lorraine?
No, I think basically DEM staff is very limited anyway, so site inspections could not be conducted at the frequency that the municipality could do it.
All right, next question. So Lisa, you had mentioned that you consider the self-assessment to really be a group project. If you're a community with smaller staff capacity. Do you have any suggestions for how to, make it a efficient process for a team? Who would you suggest to invite to participate?
I missed, there was a little glitch, Tess. If you could just repeat the question one more time, it cut out. If you could suggest, it was a little before that.
Oh, sure. Who would you suggest to join the team for completing the self-assessment?
If what couldn't happen? It sounded like there was.
If it's a smaller community with limited staff capacity.
Right. So I think Jenny is probably going to be able to speak really well to that, but I can just say that first of all, for any community, as much representation as you can get in that process, the more successful the whole endeavor is going to be. It's sort of like any project that a municipality wants to take on. If you can get buy-in from various people and communities, then you can have more support and accomplish more. This self-assessment is no different. It's not meant to be the job of one person. It's meant to be the job of multiple people, even if the municipal planner is leading it and leading the charge. As many people as you can consult as applicable to those questions. So most communities do have a DPW, you have engineering, you have building. Consulting those particular, even if it's only one individual, is better than going it alone. I'm hoping that sort of answers the question, but Jenny and Lorraine, if you want to chime in with any specifics, please feel free.
Yeah, I agree. Planning board, a member of the planning board as well, fire department. Some municipalities have a technical review committee. That would be ideal to involve them. And then eventually, once you have draft recommendations, then presenting that to the planning board, town manager, and others would be beneficial. Even if you have a sustainability committee, really depends on the town for the specifics.
Great. Okay.
That.
I missed the last thing you just said. Was Jenny, were you going to add something?
I would just say there is a page in the self-assessment that kind of is a list of the various roles that any town staff you have. That might be also helpful to figure out who to ask.
Right.
And just for reference, that would be table 3, and it is a pretty comprehensive table. So it does lead you through all the various stakeholders in the town and who might be appropriate to bring in for different types of conversations about the assessment.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And then next, so you mentioned your ability, Lisa, you were discussing your ability to consult with town boards and folks that were hoping to do this. In times of COVID, do you think you'll be able to do that virtually? And would you be willing to assist folks by meeting, either through a webinar or through Zoom?
That's an excellent question. Wow. I think we're all trying to find our footing in these uncertain times about what COVID and the recommendations are allowing us to do and are not. But one thing that I personally am impressed with is how everyone is adapting to using technology and being able to work from home to accomplish so much. So I think that Lorraine and I definitely would at least be able to do some work virtually. Obviously the specifics would, it's going to depend on the situation, but I can't see why, because completing the self-assessment has such a large digital component to it, why we wouldn't be able to be involved in the process remotely to a large extent. Lorraine, do you have any extra thoughts?
I totally agree. In fact, we've already had webinars on other topics with communities, and I think I think all communities are switching over to that mode, and they've done a great job, both for regular, just small group meetings as well as hearings. So I think that's a real advantage of moving ahead that way.
Great, that was helpful to hear. Switching back to another technical question, maybe Jenny, you can start here. Is the self-assessment useful even if you're not required to use it under MS4 requirements? Or even if you're not an MS4 community, sorry.
Yes, definitely. So MS4 would be like, it's totally supported through that program. But even if a town doesn't have any impaired water bodies, even if you don't have flooding problems, you should still be doing these lid things. It's a wise thing to do, and it's also to be considerate of your downstream neighbors where your runoff is going. Plus, there's what the co-benefits. You can bring in and add value to your community. So there's definitely good reasons why you would want to be doing lid, understanding what lid is, and doing that self-assessment so that your town could be lid friendly and a greener, more sustainable community, especially when it comes to stormwater.
Awesome. Anything to add, Lorraine or Lisa?
No, I think that said it all.
Okay. And then I do have another question. I think maybe Lorraine, if you want to take the first stab at it, and then we can have others chime in. What sources did you use to come up with the questions that you developed for the assessment?
So the assessment was based on questionnaire, a similar type questionnaire that's in Appendix A of the Rhode Island Municipal Lid Guide. In fact, that lid guide is an excellent document with example ordinances from Rhode Island and other places. So it started there, and basically many communities completed that checklist, but then again, DEM, as Jenny said, found that they still weren't really stepping up to the bar to be where they should be with lid. Another great source was Center for Watershed Protection Code and Ordinance Worksheet, which came out in 2017. That was an update of their Better Site Design Guide from several years before that. And then EPA created a fact sheet on reducing impervious cover for Massachusetts and New Hampshire for their updated MS4 permit. That was also a small fact sheet, but very useful. Particularly it included parking widths and other things like that to reduce impervious cover. We could probably put those in our resource section on the web.
Yeah, we can definitely help get those up on the SNEP network site as well. Did you have anything else to add, Jenny or Lisa?
I would encourage everyone to do the checklist, to find time to make it happen.
Okay. One more question, and it might be a tough one to answer, but if you were to try and estimate how long it might take a community to complete the assessment, what would you estimate? Maybe Jenny, if you want to start.
That I don't know. You probably want to designate a couple hours, chunks at a time, and see how far you get. I know it's hard to get just to schedule it, because you got to get people to come to the table. There might be some stuff that you can fill out on your own and then ask questions to the other departments, but I don't. It's going to be different for every town. Looking up where your regulations are, hopefully the cheat sheet makes that a little shorter to do. Using table of contents and your Control F to find where those things are in the regulations. Some people know it off the top of your head, and just depends on how long people have been there and familiar with those documents. But it's really good to get, the board members familiar with it, to see, because those are the rules they're playing by when they're reviewing plans and approving projects. So it all depends on how much time the information sharing and the education with your other staff and board members goes, because this is really an opportunity for a give and take, I would say. Some people, you might say, okay, we want to do a certain thing, and then you might have staff that pushes back and says no, and then that opens the case for a dialogue. Well, what are our values behind why we're asking to make this change, and what are your concerns? Like, why, what are your concerns? And then there's going to be a give and take, maybe a compromise, or maybe a better understanding on either part of why something gets changed or why something doesn't get changed. So I can't tell you an estimate of time. It's going to be different. It has to do with how much, you know, you're going to be able to do.
Any other nuggets of information to add, Lorraine or Lisa?
No, I agree with Jenny. It's pretty specific to the community. But I would expect that once the assessment is done, that might be the easiest part. And then it's, you know, reviewing the results and recommending changes might, and reaching consensus might be the same amount of time or longer.
I think I would wrap it up. Both Jenny and Lorraine have spoken to this quite thoroughly, but I guess listening to Jenny's explanation, which was really great, I just would like to say, at the risk of it sounding a little bit naive, which it's not, because I fully understand the burdens that municipalities bear. Everyone is overworked. There's a lot to do. There's a lot that's unfunded, and we all recognize that. But this is also an opportunity to embrace this as a way forward, as a way to do things a little bit differently, or to do them what you've been doing, but improve upon that. It is itself an opportunity to come together as a town, as a municipality, as a city, and decide what your values are surrounding LID, how to make your community be even better than it already is. So yes, it's going to take time, and we're well aware of that. But sometimes the things that take a lot of time are the things that are really worth it.
That sounds like a fantastic place to conclude the Q&A part of the webinar. I just want to mention one more time that we will be posting a recording of this on the snepnetwork.org site. And other than that, I'd like to turn it over to our presenters for some closing comments, maybe starting with you, Lorraine.
I keep on thinking about a study that Connecticut NEMO did, and they had not the same type of thing, but a similar activity in Connecticut, where they looked at implementation of LID across all the communities in the state. And they found that the single greatest factor that resulted in highest implementation of LID was the presence of a so-called stormwater champion. So someone in the town, either a board member or interested citizen or staff member, made that their goal to work on that and involve the other staff and boards. And so I can just see that that would be a huge benefit for all the communities in Rhode Island, to find one or two people that can be that stormwater.
That's a great insight to add as we wrap things up for the day. Jenny, do you have anything to add?
Nope, that's all. Thank you all for attending.
Awesome. And lastly, Lisa, any last words?
I think I gave my little inspirational bit a moment ago, but I guess I could just say, let's all think about where we started an hour ago with those views that we're showing across the screen, and keep in mind the views of our own community and what we want that to look like. There's some great opportunities out there, and the self-assessment is a fantastic starting place.
Great. Well, thanks to the three of you for joining us, and enjoy everyone listening your afternoon. Have a good one.
Thank you all.
Thank you.